across concepts in the course of trying to flesh out the classes that I teach so that they function and communicate a little bit better, and I make the most astonishing discoveries. I mean, they're not little small things, they are giant things that you say, how did you walk around this for your entire career and not notice it before? And it's really remarkable when you get those aha moments, and it's really fun to pass them on.
All right, well, welcome to the Watts Atelier instructor interviews. And this is actually an interesting interview today. Obviously, I'm Jeff Watts, and you guys have probably checked in for a lot of the other interviews with our other instructors, and I hope those have been very insightful for you. I know it's been a lot of fun, a lot of, going back and remembering lots of great periods with each one of these people, because everybody's been with the school now probably 10 plus years, as I've said before. But today's really special because I'm actually going to be interviewing my father, Robert Watts. And he was, I have to say, probably the largest influence in my life, obviously for many reasons, for getting into this career, as well as just so many different ways that he's influenced me in my teaching, communication ability, all kinds of wonderful things. So we're going to try to interview him today and get a little bit of insight into his background. I'll probably learn a lot also through this, I'm sure, because some of this stuff has just kind of gone as we've grown up. As I've grown up, I've witnessed a lot of it, but a lot of it hasn't been conversed like in a kind of formal setting like this. So I hope you guys enjoy. So this is my dad, Robert Watts here.
Pleasure to meet you all.
And we'll start with like just a brief background, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a little bit of your background, but.
Yeah, well, obviously, like everybody else that's probably looking at this, I started drawing early and didn't do too well for a lot of years, and did a lot of really, really poor stuff, and eventually went off to school, probably prematurely. And that was, I was at 18, and I had drawn a little bit at that point. I went to Pratt Institute in New York City and studied graphic design there, which we didn't know any better at the time, because there was one loose word in the Midwest for an artist that made money, and that was a commercial artist. And so off I went. And we had some drawing classes. We moved type around. We designed logos. We did all the usual stuff. And after a while, I found that I liked drawing things better than actually moving the type around. In subsequent years, that changed a little bit, and I came to be very fond of doing the graphics end of things as well. But so anyway, after a couple of years there, I decided to go to Art Center instead and take up illustration. And so off we went to California, and it was a really good school. And unlike the school that we have here, not a lot of demonstration, not a lot of really handy tips, deep insights into how to do a better piece of work with less effort perhaps and get better results. Not much of that went on there, but there were a lot of brilliant students there, and that was the key. You tend to rise to the environment that you're in. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I eventually left there, and one of the head of the illustration department, Joe Henniger, he got me an interview with an aerospace firm in San Diego. And so we came down here, my wife and I, and got the job. I'm not sure I deserved it at that point, but got it in any case, and it turned out to be a really great school ground for me. Continuing education with a little bit of money in the process. There was a really good illustrator that already worked there, and he was very helpful in helping me to learn how to use gouache more effectively, and how to read blueprints and that kind of things. We were working on airplanes at the time that didn't exist yet. So that was good training, but they also had me doing portraits of admirals and paintings for executives' walls, and cartoons for people that were leaving the company, and safety posters, and all manner of madness, and a lot of graphic design as well, which was moving type and doing paste up and all of that sort of thing. So it was a really well-rounded education there. I was doing some moonlighting on the side, and vendors that would come into the company to help us with graphic design projects would see my work and say, bring your portfolio by sometime. So it was a good little intro there too. Worked out well in that regard. So Eventually, I got enough freelance work where I was making more money at night than I was making in the daytime. And at that point, I made the bold decision to go freelance. And it was a bold decision, you know, because you have children and you need the money, and all of a sudden you're dealing with half your income. And so it was kind of an exciting year or so after that. But it all worked out well. And this period of my life was working in mostly advertising, but I was still getting work from the aerospace industry. And so occasionally they still hadn't found anybody to really replace me, and so they just freelanced the work out to me instead. And I was doing a lot of work for advertising agencies, book publishers, all kinds of various and sundry things. And so in those days, we used to refer to us, those of us who were illustrators in San Diego, as it was called dial-a-style at that time. Because you'd get a call one day and they say, I want Norman Rockwell. The next day they wanted an airbrush illustration. The next day they wanted God knows what else. But it was always different, always challenging, and you never really got into any kind of a rut. You weren't allowed to get into a rut because the next day you didn't know what was going to show up on the doorstep. So it was a great school ground, and I'm not sure there's an equivalent for that these days. So anyway, a fellow across the hallway from our offices when I was working with this design group as a freelance illustrator said, "You don't do buildings, do you?" And I said, well, I don't see any reason why not. So it turned out to be a lifelong career of doing, now 3,500 buildings later, doing architecture. I am now fully tired of doing architecture. But I still get some freelance things, and at this particular point I do a lot of work for San Diego Zoo Global, and
You're fine art.
and I teach a lot, and I do a lot of fine art. So it's a pretty mixed bag of work now, you know. And some occasional concept work, and I'd like to get more of that. And so that's about where we're at this particular juncture.
And I know for me, when was it that I used to come down and my mom used to drop me off at my dad's studio. This was a really influential time in my life because he had a studio with 4 or 5 other prominent illustrators.
Right. Well, they were graphic designers primarily.
Yeah. Well, Daryl was a illustrator, correct?
Yeah, he was right. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Was Ruben in there too? And Ruben.
Oh, you're talking about later on. Yeah.
Well, there was this period, when you had an old, I don't know, the Victorian house that Mom would drop me off at, and I would sit and draw Frazetta all day.
Forget about all these things, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I remember as a little guy, I would go from room to room watching these different people doing their illustrations, and I must have been, I don't know, 7 or something, or 5 or 7. I was just a little guy, but my dad would take the Frazetta covers and tear off the covers and throw the book away. And I remember we'd have the stack of Frazetta covers, because at the time you couldn't find much information on the guy, and I loved his stuff, so I would sit and draw, all this really ultra-violent, crazy, cool stuff as a young kid, which I'm sure nowadays they would have issues with that, but it was fun. It was I remember getting to, getting to come down and watch you work, and just being in that environment was really instrumental. I mean, just because you're so impressionable. Yeah,
it's an influence. I mean, if I was doing something really wrong, it probably wouldn't have been just as big an influence. but I think the one thing that the advantage is if you have a parent that's in a particular business, you come to an early understanding that there's a way to make a living at that business, and that should you decide to follow that, it can work. And so anyway, that was.
How'd your parents? How'd your parents feel about you going off to art school?
Though my mother painted a little bit in oil. She wasn't terribly good, but she wasn't bad either. And she took lessons from a guy named Dunbar, who was one of those tier B good oil painters. Not too bad. And so she encouraged it, and when I wanted to do that, then she naturally, she was a pretty aggressive woman, and so she found the name of a graphic designer in our city and asked him where to go, and that's where Pratt Institute emerged out of this whole thing. Fine school, but it wasn't exactly right for what what I was destined to do, I guess
Yeah.
is what you should say. But there's no way to know those things until you get out and, test the waters a little bit and find out. Yeah.
Well, the one thing that I was wondering, I mean, I think I kind of know the answer to this, but your favorite period of art or illustration, I guess just illustration would probably be one of the, and I probably know any.
Well, it's probably primarily late 30s, which is Mead Schaefer, Dean Cornwell, Norman Rockwell, all the Salt Tepper, all the rest of the gang that painted in those days. And that was about at their high water mark where they were doing their very best work. So yeah, that would be my first choice. And the subject matter was so romantic and exciting, well lit, well composed, brilliantly painted. I mean, you just couldn't help but being really excited by it. As a second choice, it would probably be Frank Frazetta and Jeff Jones of the later period. I mean, who came along with something that was just equally as exciting, and had reinvented some strange wheel, that became their own. And so, it's a tough decision to make between those two.
I know,
but that's definitely
that's
definitely where my interests lie at this point.
And then, okay, so then that kind of segues into, your favorite deceased or living artist. I mean, nowadays we have such an influx of new great painters. I mean, it seems like not a ton, but there's a better influx of newer, whether it's Richard Schmidt or someone like that.
Yeah.
There's some, Turpney, people like that. There's some pretty good ones.
There's a lot of good ones in the cowboy artist, range that are ex-New York illustrators that are all
Western guys now.
Really, really good. And, I would say mainly of the deceased ones, it would probably be a tie between Mead Schaefer and Norman Rockwell, just for sheer ability to put down tiles of paint, compose pictures, select lighting, stage things correctly, get their perspective right. They were good.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to make a choice between those two. But Norman Rockwell during the late 30s was just about as hard to beat as you could get. I mean, some really fine stuff. So then you mentioned living, right, as well.
Yeah, like living and deceased. Yeah.
Well, obviously Richard Schmidt. I'm a big fan of his. But there are some simple. When you start to move into the illustration field right now, there are a limited number of people that you can come up with as names, because most are working digitally these days. But I would say probably, I'm pretty sure Richard Schmidt is probably my top pick. Glenn Dean, because as I have worked through the years painting, like most artists, you tend to keep wanting your work to get simpler, more direct, less encumbered by a lot of tedious details and things. And Glenn's work is real good in that regard.
Yeah, he's great.
So that's about where I'm at on that.
Good. Well, a lot of these will be very generic, kind of semi-generic questions, but you'll expand on them, I'm sure. So, your biggest breakthrough, like that you could remember, like what was a big definitive breakthrough for you?
I can think of two that really were significant. One of them happened shortly after I left aerospace, and I'll elaborate on this a little bit more later on. But one of the big issues with most artists at the beginning is style. They're infatuated with style. And I was infatuated with style also. And so I went through Art Center copying the style and missing the content. So in that regard, you're not looking at composition, you're not looking at staging, you're not looking at good anatomy, you're not looking at good facial features, character, lighting, and none of those things. You're just looking at the artist you admire's edges. So anyway, I decided, I had rented a small studio space, $65 a month, I think it was. It was really cheap. And a little tiny place, and I would come home from aerospace late at night. This was actually right before and slightly after I left aerospace. I would come home, eat dinner, and then go back down for about 3 hours. And I would select a piece of reference material, draw it, do the painting, and be done by 9 o'clock. And out of this little exercise came a style. Just because there was no time. You had good bulletproof reference, you had it drawn, and you had to get it done in 3 hours. So there was no time to get fussy, and so it became kind of a direct painting exercise. And it was, and I did probably 10 of these paintings, and everyone liked them, and they really started to push me in a new direction, which before I'd just been painting surface, and I was starting to paint a little bit more content, actually mixing paint and putting it down and getting direct with the whole thing. And the second big breakthrough occurred probably 4 years or so after I started teaching plein air for you guys. And at that point, at the beginning, all I was a better painter than the rest of the students. And so I would do a painting, and it would be better than they could do. And when they couldn't really solve the problem, I was still hard pressed to say, "Oh, this is what's wrong with it. And these 3 things, these small things, will fix that." Well, I didn't have that. But about 4 years into the thing, I started seeing this whole thing as a bigger picture. Started seeing things as jigsaw puzzle pieces out there that we were painting, and simplifying down, getting the big shapes, getting everything organized correctly in the right place, the right time. So that was a big breakthrough at that point. To all of a sudden stop seeing the hair on the dog and start seeing the dog. And that was really significant. And over the last probably, I don't know, since then it's probably been another 7 or 8 years of teaching.
It's been a while now.
It's been a long time. That whole process, regardless of what type of class I was teaching, has become an expansion of that, where you start looking for big concepts, big ways to explain things, answers that people can take home with them, solutions. Instead of just saying, "Well, that feels a lot better, doesn't it?" Well, that's not any kind of a suggestion at all. All that does is confuse the artist more. So what you need are real ways to put things together in a better way. So that's really that's an ongoing breakthrough. That's not one that stops and says, "Well, we've got it now, we don't need to do any more thinking." It seems to be just, I started something which has now become a way I think about problems now.
And I think that's just one of the best things I took out of teaching as well. I mean, obviously some 20 years or some later, I mean, the intuition, but also just that problem solving ability. There's no way you could, self-leverage yourself to understand that pressure of fixing a painting in a few minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing. And yeah, I remember when you came on to teach plein air, I don't know, I don't remember if you were kind of somewhat reluctant or just...
I was more than somewhat reluctant. Yeah.
I remembered, but I thought, how much fun, and I know how good of an inherent, just general teacher in your general countenance, but I just knew that you would get something unique out of it. It sounds funny because I got so much watching you growing up, just verbalization skills, right, left brain kind of activity, which really is so helpful in teaching drawing or painting, where you can actually communicate verbally while painting, which is kind of a somewhat I wouldn't say underappreciated, but you don't see it very often amongst artists. I hear it all the time that they only have one brain, like Calvin was always saying that, Lang,
Yes.
I only have one brain. I can't do the two talking and painting thing at the same time. So I think that's something I've always admired with your ability, is your ability to communicate openly. And I obviously absorbed a lot of that.
We have a similar approach to everything in the way of teaching.
I remember when I used to Mom used to take me down to your studio. They used to call me like a little mini Bob. Like I was like this little mini version of my dad. Kind of looked like him. Kind of, it was really it was funny. I always remember that. But yeah, no, that's one of the things I admire most about. Well, so many things, but your ability to communicate what you know is insanely poignant and funny at the same time, which is really
cool. I use a lot of any of the students that have been in the classes know that my language is colorful, and I tend to use silly analogies. They seem silly at the time, but amazingly enough, they seem to stick better than hard academic stuff is just really tedious to remember. Whereas as a silly recollection, where you try to remember someone's name and you picture something silly that rhymes with their name or something, you will never forget their name. So the concept works pretty well. And the whole idea of teaching, I mean, if you want to learn how to do anything better, you start teaching it. I mean, that's really the way it works, and you know that well.
Oh yeah.
And it's now become something where I stumble across concepts in the course of trying to flesh out the classes that I teach so that they function and communicate a little bit better, and I make the most astonishing discoveries. I mean, they're not little small things, they are giant things that you say, how did you walk around this for your entire career and not notice it before? And it's really remarkable when you get those aha moments, and it's really fun to pass them on and see if they get the same kind of effective reaction in other people's work as you got out of those in yours. Mm-hmm. And so it has pretty much turned out to be the case. I may be more than full of myself in how effective I've been, but it seems to have worked. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously the classes are always packed out and everyone loves them. So, I mean, I just enjoy sitting in on them. I try to do it whenever I can, but it's tough, as you know, with the craziness of your career and everything.
Oh, yeah.
And I try to get in whenever I can and sit in, and I always learn.
It's a busman's holiday for you, though.
Yeah, it
really is.
Yeah,
truly.
it is, but it's. I wish I could be in every one of them. I mean, that's probably something I'll later regret, I'm sure. But I mean, I've tried to make as many as I could. The most unexpected aspect of being a professional, I mean, what really kind of hit you out of left field that you weren't prepared for?
Oh, goodness. Let me see. I think probably the fact that, there was an art director that once told me something at the very beginning. I'll go back, and he said, I was showing my portfolio around town, as all of you will have to do eventually. And they had been generally kind to the man in their interviews and things, and said, oh, great, look at here, we'll call you, da-da. And this one fellow, a very prominent graphic designer who I was astonished to even get to see, said, it's not the best stuff I've ever seen, it's not the worst stuff I've ever seen, and I'll forget your name in 15 minutes. Oh boy. Now that was like the sun had just come up. And so now you said, all these people have just been being nice to me. I really wasn't that good, was I? Okay, so that brings us on to that was the precursor to this. But what the bottom line is that you, as quickly as you become a force to be reckoned with and prevail in your industry, you can just as quickly be forgotten and passed over as they move on to somebody who is 22, who's pretty darn good. And so what I guess the big point here is that you must work very hard. You must be as good as you can possibly be, and you must reinvent yourself on a continual basis. So you're always looking to expand, change, improve, modify your approach to your business so that you have a new face every so often that's matured enough, that you can present the new face and you say, this is the new Robert now that's doing this. And while you're still in the game, once you're off the lineup, it's tough to get back in. So that was really a revelation, because you think, hey, once I get really, really good and everybody knows my name, I got it, I'm set. It's going to go that way for the rest of my life. No.
Yeah, no, I think we've all figured that one out.
No.
Yeah, you can't rest on your laurels, that's for sure.
Not at all, no.
And I try to tell the younger students here, and it's tough. I mean, everyone always kind of says, well, how do you get someone from student to professional? And it really isn't the job of the school. The job is to systematically eliminate as many weaknesses as possible to prepare you as much as possible for that
Sure.
leap. You have to make that leap, and no one makes it the same way. Sometimes luck plays a role, sometimes timing with the market and what's fashionable at the time. Frazetta, if he was alive today, would have a hard time getting work, with the styles that are common today. So a lot of times it is kind of something very complex to understand why some people succeed, some don't. The magnitude with which they succeed, I still have not figured any of that out.
But no, if you watch interviews of rock stars, piano players, classical musicians, trumpet players, whatever, people that write novels, anything, it's usually, it comes down to something really strange happens. You do everything you can to prepare yourself for the career that you've chosen, and then you accidentally rear end some car. It turns out to be an art director at some place, and you get to know them, you get their card, you get their phone number, and voila, somehow you end up getting work out of the guy whose car you nearly ruined. You know, and I mean, but it's the strange way that life really works, and it's just what you were talking about.
The irony is
you don't
ridiculous.
know where. All you can do is get as good as you can, as quick as you can, and then show your stuff to as many people as you can. Everybody, you just have to bore the entire universe flat on its back with what you do in your life. I mean, it's really the only choice you have. If you don't make any noise, they'll plant beans over you. You know, I mean, you know, they'll just they will.
I know.
You've got to make noise, and so that's important. And if you have a problem making noise, you want to take some classes and start doing a little bit of work to get your noise-making ability up to speed, too.
Well, you always used to tell me, and this is so true, and you got to have skin like an alligator.
Oh,
You know?
yeah.
I mean, you have to be really
It's
able
tough.
to take ridiculous amounts of rejection and, you know, not getting in shows and you know, submitting with the best of interest. And I tell a lot of young students, you know, don't wait to get out into the environment. Get into some of the organizations, get into some of the shows, so you don't get a piece in the show. Try again next year. Try again next year.
That's all you can do.
Because an artist without a deadline is dead in the water. I mean, you don't get anything done.
That's right.
I mean, you really
Yeah.
don't. So I think a lot of people say, do you teach professional classes at your school? And it's like, yeah, we come in every day complaining and talking about what we're dealing with in galleries and jobs we're working on. And that's really what the profession, you learn the most about the profession by listening to other professionals talk about what they're going through in the profession.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's one cool thing about the Atelier. I mean, Eric brings in jobs he's working on. You bring in stuff you're working on. I bring in stuff, you know, a lot of times I'm working on fine art pieces unfinished. You've got Lucas bringing in his projects. Everybody's kind of like a team of people, and that camaraderie, I think, is what really fuels the growth. You know, just being able to say, hey, you know, I'm close to being able to do that, or there's no way I could do that. And
You know, a lot of the students bring in pieces that they're working on as well, that are with the ones that are getting close to
launching portfolios.
Yeah, to launching out into traffic. You know, and amazingly enough, you know, you see some really bright stuff from student work too. I mean, that will frequently say, "Gee, I got to try that. That's a good idea," you know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it works up and downhill both. You know, I think it's a lively thing. You know, I think that the school is it's a social club at one hand, you know, and serious hard work at the other.
That's what I love about
it. It's a nice combination.
Yeah, you wouldn't want
really good.
You know, when you get too uptight, some of these structured programs, you lose a lot of the humanity behind the program. And I think people know in an environment like this, because you're not being graded and you're not going to graduate, that there is a certain sense of reality, responsibility that you're going to have to take to get good. We're not going to babysit you. We're not going to, you know, drive you to get your supplies. We're not
You don't get that B+ to make you feel like you've actually succeeded.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's really designed around the reality of what it's like when you're really out there working. Nobody checks in on you. You know, you get a gallery show, and next September they want 32 pieces, and good luck. Have them all here framed and ready to go and shot and looking good by the catalog for this date and that for that date, and they never check up on you after that. So it's either you figuring out how to micromanage and allocate your time correctly, or you're not going to hit that deadline. And those are tough. I mean, no one cares. I mean, really, at the end of the day, unless the gallery doesn't get their work, and then you're out of the gallery. It's probably, you know, so it's pretty straightforward.
That's something I felt was an important part of my job as an instructor, is to help people come up with ways of getting things done quickly, because eventually one has to meet deadlines. And it's very important that you get every tool in your box that you can get, you know, to get things done in a hurry. I mean, I, as recently as 2 days ago, working on a project where I'm dearly loved, basically, by the client, and they like everything that I do, they still call back and say, take the purple out of the sky and put blue in, you know? So your thick skin has to come in there, even though you say, darn, I really like that purple sky, you know? You got to take it out. You can't argue with them, because they're the ones that are paying the bill.
Yeah.
And so you try to be the good the good contractor,
Diplomatic.
working for people. So you have to really bite your lip a lot, and the odd part about it all is that maybe a blue sky was better. You really you think you get pretty full of yourself as an artist eventually, especially after you start getting backlogs of work in the pipeline, and you say, boy, I'm really in demand. I'm hot stuff now, and by God, it's going to be a purple sky. You got to lose that, and because art directors, as tedious as they can be, frequently do know what they're talking about. So anyway, that's enough on that subject.
So if you could paint anything that you wanted to, and this is what I've struggled with so much now. I mean,
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing worse than